Back here on Sports Guys Talking Wrestling on the Horn, 104.9 AM 1260. Stu Myrick here. I've talked frequently about where I started to watch wrestling, and my beginnings started back, and I think you heard Dave LaGreca and I talk about this, the days of Mid-South Wrestling and world-class wrestling. And one of the gentlemen that I remember booing vociferously, he may be the $1 Million Man to everybody, but to me, he's still the leader of that dastardly rat pack. Joining us on the Vaqueros Cafe and Cantina hotline, it is none other than WWE Hall of Famer Ted DiBiase. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, my friend, and how are you?
I'm doing great. Let's start with this. I want to ask this because you worked for two of probably the toughest men in the wrestling business. So I'm going to ask you, who was tougher, Bill Watts or Vince McMahon?
Well, I tell you what, I think it might be a toss-up. Bill, like myself, is a very strong Christian now, and I've told Bill that in the conversations. I said, man, I sure wish you'd have been a strong Christian back when I was working for you. So you were pretty much a slave driver.
I've heard that before. In fact, talked to Hacksaw Jim Duggan about a year or so ago, and he said the same thing, quite frankly.
Yeah, we were on the road. And regardless of what territory, because back then we called them territories,
right? Regional
wrestling before Vince took off and went national. But there were really no days off. You wrestled every day. Some of the towns were weekly towns, and like wrestling fans were like, they knew that every, for example, in Amarillo, Texas, every Thursday night was wrestling. And you have your favorite TV show, and well, you have your favorite thing. And if it was wrestling, it was on Thursday nights. And then other towns were considered what we call spot shows. In other words, they weren't run, on a weekly basis, but there was a show every day. And so what was a day off? A day off was when you happened to be wrestling in the town where you were hanging your hat, where you had an apartment. And it's just crazy. But that's the way it was back then. And then Vince and the WWF goes national, international, and I'm not sure which was worse. Now with Vince, we would go 3 weeks on and a week off.
Mm-hmm.
But still, any way you look at it, you were only off. You really say week off. One of those days one of your off days you're spending getting home, and one of them you're leaving again. So you're really only home 5 days. So it was tough. It was really tough. But as far as business, I believe Bill Watts was one of the greatest minds in the wrestling business ever, in terms of his knowledge and his understanding of the psychology of what wrestling is. He was the best. Vince, on the other hand, I look at Vince and say, Vince is a genius at marketing his product.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing different is that Vince never wrestled. Bill did. So Bill was on the inside. And Vince has done things and been involved in a few matches, but he never was one of the boys in terms of wrestling all the time. So I think that's where Bill has the advantage on him.
Right. And Bill was so adamant about, for instance, nowadays it's not uncommon to see two guys that were in the ring together fighting each other, and then you see them later, at a Denny's or something. Whereas Bill was, he was adamant about keeping that line, keeping that distinction. You were Ted DiBiase, the leader of the Rat Pack, whether you were in the middle of the Shreveport Boys Club or if you were in some
right.
greasy spoon
right.
outside of Bossier City.
Exactly. And it was just, it was, now that didn't mean I wouldn't mistreat people. I wouldn't treat people on the street the way, like the character would in the ring.
Of course.
But I just kept to myself and what have you. And you better, especially if you're a heel, but irregardless, if you're a wrestler, you better be able to take care of yourself, because if you ever did get in a fight and you got your butt kicked, you'd be fired.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
You'd be gone.
Absolutely. Talking with Ted DiBiase, the WWE Hall of Famer. He's got a movie coming out on November 7th called The Price of Fame, and we're going to get to that here in just a second. You spent most of your career as a heel, as a bad guy. But I do remember the one, and I think for anybody that watched Mid-South Wrestling, this was one of the iconic moments, and it was back November 1985. You were set up to wrestle the Nature Boy Ric Flair for the NWA World Championship, and Dick Murdoch, the Captain Redneck himself, comes out. You were in the middle of the match. Flair knees you out to the floor, and then Murdoch just slammed your head into the post. And, of course, back then, I'm thinking, oh, my God, Dick Murdoch just killed Ted DiBiase. And so they had to stop the match. They took you in the back, and Bill Watts came on and said, look, we've decided we're going to continue. He wants to continue with the match. He's going to be heavily bandaged. Parental discretion, because the bandage might come off. And here you come, charging back out to the ring. This big old bandage. I mean, you had half your head wrapped up. And then you continue in the match, and the blood is trickling. And it was one of those just magical matches where, you know, at any moment, everybody believed you were going to be the world champion. I mean, is that one of talk about pre-WWE?
One of those moments, it was to me, it's a picture of the genius of Bill Watts, because I had been, when I first started in Mid-South in 1975, I was 21 years old, and I really was a baby face. If you look at my pictures back then, oh my gosh, talk about clean cut, and I didn't look like a heel at all, and so I was a good guy. I was a baby face for those first several years, and I turned heel on Junkyard Dog, and it was my idea, and Ernie Ladd loved it, and that's when I really became a heel. But from 1975 to whenever that was, probably 81 maybe, or I think so. Mm-hmm. I had been pretty much babyface, and but when Bill turned me heel with JYD, it was like, as far as the fans were concerned, somebody that they had trusted, and because all those fans in Mid-South had watched me grow up, and then they knew about my relationship with JYD, and then I turned on him. It was like turning on them, and I was red hot as a heel. Well, you take that heel then, and Bill Watts in that match with Flair and in the deal with Murdoch, in one night he turns me, he flips me back to being a good guy. It was incredible.
Oh, it was. I mean, it was one of those iconic moments that will always be remembered when someone talks about Mid-South Wrestling. Was that match, and like I said, during the when the match restarted, and then the bandage comes off, and you've got the Crimson Mask going, and Flair, and yet you have Flair down and out, and you can't. It was like several near falls. I mean, just the psychology of that match is it's a masterpiece. And I've always said, if you want to look at how to do a character change and how to bring people in, that's one of the matches you need to put on your tape and watch that match and learn from it. It's just incredible. So let's talk about your transition from Mid-South to WWE. It was because I remember I actually saw you live in Longview, Texas, of all places, when you were still with Mid-South. And yeah, you had the blonde hair, and you were kind of you had kind of really gotten into the whole babyface thing. They'd take you to WWE, and you do the $1 million gimmick, the $1 million man, and the belt. Was there one of those times when you watched it back and going, that really worked, didn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it was. I had been a babyface, then I was a heel, and I was a heel for a long time. And then for that short run, and when Watts turned me babyface again, and then teamed me up with Steve Williams, and that was a hot tag team, and hot item. And then, but at the same time, I was going back and forth to Japan. Mm-hmm. But when the opportunity came to go to the WWF and become this character, and I really believe that the reason Vince chose me to be the $1 Million Man was the kind of heel I was. I carried myself very aloof, and I talked down to the people, and I was like I was the bully, and you never get tired of seeing a bully get his butt kicked, because bullies always they pick on weaker opponents, and they, whenever they're, most of the times, if a bully's ever confronted, he becomes a coward because he doesn't want confrontation. And that was my character, and that's what the $1 Million Man was. But he bullied everybody with his wealth, and so I think it was a natural fit.
It was, and again, iconic moments. That I remember you're on the interview stage with Mean Gene and Virgil. And you had the kid that was dribbling the basketball, and you were going to give him like $100, and he had to dribble it so many times, and he got like one or two shy, and then I think Virgil kicked the basketball, and tough luck kid. I mean, it was fantastic.
The deal, I told the kid, I said, if you can dribble this basketball, I said, show me you can dribble it. So he does it 10 times. So if you can do it again 15 times without missing, I'm gonna give you $500, kid. And listen, I could tell by looking at you, you could use the money. And I said, oh, what a jerk, right? And so he gets to 14, and I just stick my foot out, and the ball bounces off my foot. Sorry, kid, when you don't get the job done, you don't get the money. And my voice is deep; it carries. He was like 6 years old, and we had rehearsed it, and everything was fine. But when we did it live, I had to be more hardcore, and it scared him. And he, I mean, crocodile tears, and he ran to his mother. He couldn't have done it any better.
Right.
And of course, everybody in the building wanted it. So when I got in the back, they were all high-fiving and going, "That was great. That was the greatest thing we've ever seen." And I said, "Yeah, well, please find an armored vehicle to get me out of the building. Those people want to kill me now." So
yes,
I've heard about that more than any of the stunts we did. I hear about that one the most.
Well, I mean, I think that one's the one that kind of just encapsulated the character that was the $1 Million Man. We're talking with WWE Hall of Famer Ted DiBiase on Sports Guys Talking Wrestling. Let me ask you, how many times a week do you get asked to do the laugh? Because that laugh is one of the most iconic laughs. I mean, it's one of those things, you hear it and you immediately know, hey, that's Ted DiBiase.
Yeah. All the time. I mean, I tell everybody, I said, a 19-year active wrestling career, and what am I remembered for?
I know.
Come on, and it's like, but again, the story behind that, we back when we would cut in our interviews for individual markets, Mean Gene Okerlund did all that stuff, and so we would set up, and guys would have a certain time slot where they had to go and do their interviews with Gene. And I do an interview, and I just happened to end the interview laughing like that. And really, all that is, that's an exaggeration of my normal laugh. And Vince happened to be walking by, and stuck his head in the door, and he went, "That is it. That is the $1 Million Man, and I want to hear that laugh every time you cut an interview." And there you go.
Right. It just, like I said, that's one of those things. I mean, it's kind of like a catchphrase. You hear a catchphrase, you know who it is. You hear that laugh, you know who it is. Let me ask you before we get to the movie, I want to ask you about, because you were part of two really, just one of the very memorable angles. You were the original manager of, back then, the Ringmaster, who of course ended up being Stone Cold Steve Austin. You were also the spokesperson for the NWO during its early days. Is there ever a time when you just you try to figure out which one of those may have been more iconic?
No, I mean, again, for me, a lot of that is just, I was a wrestler, and that was my job, and a lot of that stuff was another day at the office. But time means everything. I mean, Vince put me with Steve Austin initially, just Steve was young, and Steve was not, had not become the big star yet, and it was the rub. Putting him with me helped elevate him. Just by association, and then he took the ball and ran with it. I don't think anybody ever envisioned that he would go to the heights that he went, but he did. He did a great job. And going to the NWO, and really, realistically, when I left the WWE, I really, I wasn't upset with the company. I didn't want to be back on the road, which is part of my story. That's why this documentary is coming out. Mm-hmm. The road for me was danger. The road was, okay, it's like if you're going to quit drinking, stay out of the bar. So if you're going to quit doing all this stuff, then you got to separate yourself from it. And I had pretty much done that. Vince's decision to put me back on the road with Steve Austin and I think Sid, that was a business decision. And of course, Vince and I have had the conversation since then, and I just felt like, here's a guy running his business. He's not interested in my personal problems or anything. I was a manager, a commentator. Didn't require me to be on the road, but he wanted me to do this, and so he puts me back on the road, and I was uncomfortable there, and that's why I went to WCW, because I could go to that company and do what I had been doing before, which is do the TVs and go home. And the WCW, the NWO was a great thing, but when it was over, it was over. It was like it had the hottest TV ratings of all time in wrestling, but because the story was not about the good guy and the bad guy on either television show. It was who's the good guy and who's the bad guy in the ratings. The match was between the WWF and WCW, and that's what the fans were tuning in for. But WCW, when that angle ran its course, they were done. There was no, because here's the difference. Vince McMahon, there were a lot of guys that left his company, and when they left, he created new stars. Almost all of the stars that were on WCW, except Ric Flair, were created by Vince McMahon. And, I think probably Goldberg is probably the only star that Eric Bischoff could maybe take credit for.
Right. Well, you're right. And you're right. It seems, in professional wrestling, if something goes sour, it's going to go sour pretty quickly, more often than not.
Yeah.
So, talking with
it's just
go ahead. I'm sorry.
Vince created stars. A lot of guys moved, and he created new stars. And Eric just he had never done that. He didn't know how to do it.
Right.
And obviously, we all know who won the war.
Who won the war? That's right.
And life goes on, and the company goes on.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable.
Talking with Ted DiBiase. So let's transition to this film, The Price of Fame. How did this all get started? What was the motivation to have this movie made?
Well, I've been telling my story for 17 years. Longer than that actually, since about 1994. In 1992, my world kind of caved in because I got, like a lot of guys, I got caught up in it. The wrestling takes off and starts flying, and now we're not just, we became literally like rock stars. We're traveling all over the United States. We're traveling to Canada. We're traveling to Europe, and it's like that old rock and roll song: drugs, sex, and rock and roll. And fame, fame, number one, is fleeting. It's kind of like the old Eagle song, they'll never forget you till somebody new comes along. But it looks like, boy, that's really what you want to be. And it looks good from the outside. But, what fans don't understand is when I go and wrestle at a sellout at Madison Square Garden, I think 80,000 at Wembley Stadium, that's the largest crowd I ever wrestled for. That's a thrill. There's no doubt it's a thrill. And it's good. It's cool to know that all those people know your name. They call you by name. They recognize you. But when that show's over and you go back to that empty hotel room, and in London, a city that you don't know, and then you do it again the next night, and the next night, and the next night, and you do it 21 days in a row, and then you get a little break and you go home. But then you got to go back and do it again and again and again. That's when you start sauntering down to the bar to have a beer, because you're everybody knows you, but they don't. And you're sitting in a hotel room staring at four walls and a television set, and your family's thousands of miles away. That's where all the junk comes into play. And again, it's not the WWE, it's not the NFL, it's not the motion picture industry. It's the nature of the beast. And as long as you can bring accountability into your life to safeguard yourself from those things, okay. But by and large, the nature of the beast seems to be it's hard, and it's like with my boys wanting to be wrestlers. My dad didn't want me to be a wrestler.
Mm-hmm.
He loved what he did, and I loved what I did. But the lifestyle that came along with it was what was hard. And even today, I recommend the young guys. I said, if you want to be a wrestler, go for it, but do it while you're single.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then at the same time, be single, but be smart. Don't ruin your career by going out and getting drunk and having a wreck, or there's so many different things. You hear the stories all the time, and all you have to do is pick up a tabloid magazine. Tabloid magazines make a fortune off the misery of celebrities.
Yes, they do. All
these rich, famous people who seemingly have everything obviously don't, because their lives are in turmoil. And that's the price of fame is the story of my personal redemption. It's the story of the mending of my marriage and the relationship between me and my sons, and that relationship. And it's about grace. It's about redemption. It's about overcoming and working through. And of course, I'm a Christian. I'm a minister now. I have been for 17 years.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even if you don't believe in God, I mean, I would hope that people can watch this and they could walk away with this and realize that all the things that we chase, that we think are so important, that are going to if I just had this, I'm going to be happy. It's not there.
Yeah.
I can tell you, I mean, people ask me all the time, they go, Ted, are you really a multimillionaire? And I go, no, I'm not. And I said, but you know what I've got today? I have the love and respect of my wife. I have the love and respect of my children. I have the privilege of watching and the sheer joy of watching my grandchildren grow up. And I said, you can't put a price on that. It's family, and again, one day I'm going to die, and somebody hopefully my sons will stand over my carcass and eulogize me. And I don't want to just be remembered as Ted DiBiase, a legendary wrestler and Hall of Famer. I want to be remembered as somebody who left a legacy that at the end of the day, here's a guy who was blessed in so many ways, and he took it upon himself, to put the needs of his family, his children, his grandchildren, and others ahead of his own, and to give it back, to pay it forward.
Absolutely.
That's the legacy I'm trying to leave, and that's what this film is about. And I think that, and I'm just hoping that a lot of people will turn out to it, and I hope that it can help a lot of people, because people get into struggles, and sometimes they think, I'm the only one going through this. Well, you know what? There's nothing new under the sun. There's no new problems. It's just we all have them, and sometimes we don't realize that other people are suffering just like we are. And I just want people to know there is hope.
Right, there is hope, and that's one of the biggest things, is realizing that you're not alone. Let me ask you this, because I know you worked with Ted Jr. In WWE when he was a wrestler. What was it like to work with him with this movie?
Well, it was great, and in reality, it's kind of like. Back when everything broke and my wife confronted me with all the junk I was doing, she said this. She said, in spite of what you've done to me and how you've hurt me, she goes, you're a great dad, and I want to destroy that. She said, so until they're old enough to understand this, they don't know it. And so that's the way it was. And my boys never started hearing the story until I started speaking in churches, and I'm sharing it, from the pulpit, and I'm sharing it with a whole church full of people. And I just said, okay, if they need any more information, they're going to come to me and they'll ask. And they never really did, because they saw that their mother and I were happy together and very much in love. And but when the idea for the movie came, the movie was actually Peter Fierro, who directs this and edited all this stuff together. I met him like 5 or 6 years ago. He came to interview me for a friend in what we call a shoot interview. We're not talking wrestling storylines. We're talking real life. And so when we start talking about my real life, most of the time I'm going to start telling you about what Jesus is doing in it. And in Pete's own words, he said, I, at the time, was the backslidden son of a minister. And he said, Ted's story just resonated with me. And, you know, that was the beginning of a turnaround for Pete. And then when I would go back to the New York area, he would come and he would hear me speak, and we became good friends. And then he approached me one day and he said, you know, I do wedding photography and video. He says, I document weddings. He says, I've never done a documentary, but I'd like to tell your story.
Wow, that's amazing.
I said, wow. I said, well, you know what? All right, Pete. And then my son comes along and he says, Dad, and he says, you know what? You do a lot of speaking, and you know, obviously the story is about the restoration of you and Mom's life and your marriage. She goes, but you also talk to a lot of men about the importance of how important it is for children to have good dads. So let's tell this story through my eyes. And it wasn't really until we did the documentary that my sons had the opportunity to ask me that question. Dad, how could you possibly do this to our mom? And that's it. It's in the story. I hope people will go and see it. And so there's restoration there too. I mean, I am beyond blessed because I have an incredible wife, and I have children that do look up to me and respect me. When my boys, and you know, a lot of guys they'll have their, you know, some mentor of theirs in wrestling induct them in the Hall of Fame. I had my sons induct me in the Hall of Fame, and nothing could have given me greater joy than to hear my son say, "I love the man that my father is today, a man of strong character, integrity," and that made it all worth it. That was the line for me that made the whole weekend for me, was to hear my son say that.
I remember that induction well, and you're right. It was very touching, and they couldn't have done a better job. Ted DiBiase, the movie is called The Price of Fame. You can see the trailer at thepriceoffame.com. You can get tickets. It's going to be on November 7th, a one-time showing in movie theaters across the U.S. You can buy tickets online via www.fathom.events.com. It'll ask you for a zip code, and it'll tell you which movie theater is closest to you. I saw 3 or at least 4 in the Austin area that are going to be showing this. And, of course, you can follow Ted on Twitter at MDM. That's like $1 Million Man. MDM, Ted DiBiase. Ted, I know we're running a little bit short on time, and I don't want to keep you much longer, but, man, it was so good to talk to you, and I've seen a piece of the movie. It looks fantastic. As you said, hope out of hopelessness and a story of redemption is so cool to see. Again, it's an honor to talk to you, sir. I hope we get to do it again and just, you know, talk about some old stories from way back in the Mid-South days. But Ted DiBiase, it's been an honor, and all the best to you, sir. And looking forward to great things from The Price of Fame.
Well, again, I can't thank you enough for giving me the opportunity to share this with you, and you know, encourage friends and fans to turn out and see this movie. And I'd even say to the church folks out there, if you've got some friends that might be struggling in their marriage or struggling in any other relationships, bring them to see this movie, because it'll give them hope. You'll realize that it's never too late. And again, thank you so much. And I guess I should end this as I always do, and just remind everybody that everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.
Okay, I'm going to count you down, and you just go when you're ready. 3, 2, 1.
Hey, everybody, this is Ted DiBiase, the $1 Million Man, and you're listening to Sports Guys Talking Wrestling. And if you want to get your money's worth, then you need to stay right here, because remember, everybody's got a price for the $1 Million Man.